Hello everybody, today we're going to start on our new ideology in our political ideas unit, and we're going to look at conservatism. So I'm going to try and go over the basics and look at all the different aspects, just as we have done with liberalism and socialism. Right, now on our first kind of core topic, conservatism is very, very different from the other ideologies that we look at in terms of they're a bit cynical, they're a bit wary, they're a bit less enthusiastic about human nature. For conservatives, humans are flawed and imperfect, and therefore they dismiss the idea of a utopian society and actually are very, very suspicious of anybody who talks about trying to create one. They also see human nature as being more fixed, that it's something that it can't be improved or developed in the same way that, for example, socialists say. And there are kind of several key thinkers that we'll go through all the key thinkers that really impact on what conservatives say about human nature. One of the first ones is Hobbes, and this really is quite cynical. He talks about humans being ruthless, selfish, calculating, competitive. Makes us all sound lovely, doesn't he? And he says what we need is we need formal authority to prevent kind of hatred and lawlessness and war and disaster and life being brutish and short and painful. However, he did see people as being rational, so there's a kind of a slight connection to liberalism in there, but without any of the lovely, fluffy optimism about people. Burke, who's another key conservative thinker, doesn't really see humans as being hugely rational, instead pointing to the things we should focus on being custom and habit and experience, and use that to guide behaviour. That he did share Hobbes' view that we were flawed, that human nature was flawed, but he didn't see it as being quite as terrible and scary as Hobbes saw it as being. And he talked about community based around tradition, culture, and the church. There's been development of that. Oakeshott has talked about a kind of an innate human nature having an innate fear of the unknown, which is a kind of inherent part of conservatism, this fear of change. And Oakeshott says that is part of humanity, and he kind of builds on the ideas of Burke. The new right are slightly odd in terms of where they sit with the rest of conservatives when it comes to human nature, because they talk about kind of enterprise and innovation, and you kind of go, oh, right, that sounds liberal, but then they talk again about this need for formal authority, and again an emphasis on community, which then kind of breaks away from the liberal ideas and starts connecting them a bit more to the rest of conservatism. This all links in then with conservative views on society. First of all, one of the big things you have to deal with conservatives when it comes to society is, well, do they really believe it exists? Now, most conservatives do. Burke wrote about little platoons, which were kind of local communities, and these provided the security and the status, the inspiration that people needed, and gave a degree of control. I mean, not all conservatives, however, kind of share this view. I mean, one of the most famous quotes from Margaret Thatcher was that she stated there was no such thing as society. There was only individuals, which makes her sound like a liberal immediately, and family, which then connects her a bit back to some of the conservative values. So it's not a completely straightforward idea of what the conservatives believe about society. Now, generally, and it's one of the reasons why it's difficult to pin down, is conservatives see society as something that is organic, something that emerges naturally rather than something that can be created. So liberals and socialists think you can, through various mechanisms, you can create or help develop a society. Well, the conservatives go, it's kind of, it's like a plant. It kind of grows over time and emerges and it changes. And therefore, society is unpredictable. Therefore, what they want to do is they want to deal with society in a practical way, based on what we refer to as empiricism, which is things based on evidence. So they're not trying to think how society should be or the direction society should go in. They're not trying to mold it or form it. They're just dealing with it as it is and trying to do what is best given the society that you're dealing with at the time. They do, however, put a great deal of store by tradition. They resist all call for kind of radical change. Anybody who's suggesting big changes is treated with a great skepticism by conservatives, and this refers to society as well as everything else. And there's a big tradition in conservatism of this kind of Judeo-Christian morals, and the traditions and the attitudes of that play a really important part in the formation of conservative societies, which are often linked to traditional religious values. Now, within a society, and again, this is very different to what we've seen in other ideologies, conservatives stress the importance of hierarchy, and not something to be removed or to be overcome, but it's something that is there and should be there. And they accept inequality as well. So again, they're not looking ways round of it in any way. They kind of go, well, yeah, it's unequal. There you are. They do see it as the duty of some people at the top in some forms of conservatism, particularly one nation conservatism, to look after those at the bottom of society, but not necessarily to move the people at the bottom of society up from being at the bottom of society, but merely to help them. And often that can be quite a cynical move to try and prevent the spread of other political ideologies and radical change or revolution or something like that. A real cornerstone of conservative society is property. So the ability to own property, the ability to inherit property and pass it down through families is important. And there's a real kind of emphasis in conservative ideology about property giving people a stake in society. So a property-owning society is one which is likely to be law-abiding, which is likely to have a community spirit and respect for others and things like that. So they see that as one mechanism of society being held together by everybody owning their own property and having a stake in it. And therefore, you'll see conservative governments who promote property ownership. So, for example, we saw the right to buy scheme under Thatcher's government. Right. When it comes to the economy, the conservatism is in some ways quite unified, and in others, again, is quite divided. So they defend inequality, and they support hierarchy, and therefore capitalism seems as the natural bedfellow to conservatism. However, there is a bit of a clash in ideology here, because free markets are volatile and they change and they're unpredictable, and conservatism doesn't like that. So what they want to do is they want to try and affect capitalism in a way that brings greater kind of order and stability. They're skeptical that the idea that markets will always do good and always achieve what is best. So this has led to a degree of intervention in the state by conservative governments through time. Now, the most traditional method of this was something known as protectivism. Protectionism, and what this is when you impose tariffs or taxes on imported foreign goods, and you do this to protect your home industries and your markets in the nation state, and you might do it to dissuade people from buying certain things. Now, again, a very traditional form of conservatism when it comes to the economy, but again, something you would see very strongly in the modern day has been enacted by President Trump in the USA, who again is really strong on protectionism. Now, the new right is, again, different from the rest of conservatism when it comes to the economy, because it has fully embraced the free market. And we saw this very much under Thatcher and Reagan and what was referred to as Reaganomics, where you had these completely free markets and the stop to protectionism and that kind of traditional conservative action. Now, the new right argue that this kind of laissez-faire economics is going to generate a load of wealth, and that's going to have a couple of major impacts. So it will destroy socialism, because people won't need socialism because they will be able to gain prosperity through these free markets. Then also they talk about it providing money. Well, and this makes them very different from people in the tradition of liberalism, who would then want to spend this money on opportunity and in dealing with inequality or something like that. What the new right want to spend the money on is police and the armed forces, which goes back to that cynical view of human nature and view of society, and that idea that the state's job is really just to protect the people. And for the new right, they should then have a minimal role in economics whatsoever. And again, you would look towards America for examples of this. You look at the American spending on things like the armed forces and policing, and they are really, really high. Right. So the state. Now, conservatism on this, again, is not completely united. But generally speaking, they see a state ideally emerging slowly over time, and this is this organic feel to conservatism. So think about the UK state and constitution and how that's kind of changed bit by bit in a piecemeal fashion. That kind of fits with conservative ideology on the state. And what they say is you then end up with is a state that deals with the world as it is rather than based on an ideology. And they see the problem with that kind of big moment creates constitution at this moment in time is, well, is that going to fit in 50 years, 100 years, 200 years time? Whilst an organic state is dealing with reality rather than a kind of an idea of how the world should be dreamt up in someone's head. Underpinning all this, the state should be about order and authority. It's the state's job to keep people in check. And essentially, if you don't have any law and order, then you don't have any rights. So there's nothing. So you need that kind of strong formal state to make sure that individual freedom is there. But you've got different belief about individual freedom than you would, for example, in a liberal state. Now, this is an interesting bit in terms of it. The Conservatives believe there should be a kind of a ruling class. And as we've mentioned before, they do believe in hierarchy. And they talk about a kind of ruling class that is kind of brought up to rule. Now, there is some kind of really strong stuff. You can see this in the UK. If you look at the number of our prime ministers who have been to schools like Eton, and Eton is the particular example, and then through to degrees in Oxford and Cambridge, and you look at the background of a lot of these political leaders, it's all very similar. They are from that elite ruling class. Boris Johnson, our current prime minister, being a good example of this. So again, for a Conservative, then this is the right thing to happen because there should be a ruling elite. Now, another really important developing part about conservatism in the state is the idea of the nation state. And this is seen as being particularly vital in the UK and the USA. And it forms a major part of national identity. And this is imbued with tradition and a kind of connection to political leaders, for example, in the UK, monarchs, and perhaps to a lesser extent, prime ministers. And in America, to presidents and everything that office holds. So the nation state, and this then tends to imbue the conservative ideal of a state with ideas of patriotism and the kind of love of country. Right, this is the bit I found is a bit mind-blowing because there is very, very much nuanced differences between different forms of conservatism as it's developed over a long period of time. Very early conservatism is about a reaction against revolution, most notably the French Revolution, and a kind of counter to a lot of the Enlightenment ideas. And very much imbued in conservatism, this idea of a resistance to radical change. Then developing over time in traditional conservatism, we then get one nation conservatism, mainly through Disraeli in the UK and Bismarck in Germany, that promote paternalism and national unity. Now, these things are to prevent revolution, and they dismiss ideas like, for example, the camaraderie of workers in one country with workers in another. They're kind of, well, you're German, and therefore your kind of allegiance is to Germany, or you're British and your allegiance is to Britain. And we will do things to make your life better, so you don't need socialism and stuff like that. And this idea, again, of hierarchy, but that hierarchy working in an effective way where the people at the top look after the people lower down, have a degree of responsibility. The next form of traditional conservatism is a reaction against fascism, and what I put down here is egalitarianism, which essentially is socialism in its different forms. And what conservatism tried to do at this point was to promote kind of moderate reform to avoid movement to the extremes. So to fight off fascism and communism, they kind of went, well, we're going to accept some of these kind of moves that have happened with other democratic parties towards a bigger state and a post-war consensus and Keynesian economics and the Beveridge Report and the NHS and that kind of stuff. So that was the kind of the next stage of that. Now, what's interesting with traditional conservatism, it's rather than an ideology of its own, arguably, it's really a reaction to other ones. So there's the kind of ideology of egalitarianism and revolution, and the growth of socialism and different ideologies. And as it goes through, conservatism reacts against those and kind of goes, well, no, we don't like that. It's too much change. Just do this. But it's not fixed, and that's a really important bit about conservatism. It develops because that's what it thinks should happen, is that you should engage with the time and what is going on, and based on the evidence of how society is you should adapt. And that goes for the overarching ideologies. A different ideology that developed mainly in continental Europe rather than in the UK is Christian democracy, which has got very strong links with kind of religious morality. It's very, very socially conservative, but again, in the post-war era, it accepted Keynesian economics. And again, so there is some connections to that in the UK, but it's largely a European form of conservatism. And then we've got this one that is always the puzzle, this kind of final step or most recent step in conservatism, which is the new right conservatism. It's an import from the USA. It has laissez-faire economics. It has small government, but it has that strong Christian morality bit that we see very strongly, particularly in the Midwest and the South in America. So it's very, very socially conservative, or can be. It also is very patriotic, tends to wrap itself in the flag, and therefore, though it believes in a small government, it will spend exorbitant amounts of money on military and police. So what's odd about it is it can be seen as both being liberal and illiberal at the same time, or liberal and conservative at the same time. Because economics are liberal, but its attitudes to society and aspects of government are far, far more conservative. So again, it's quite a mind-blowing mix, the development in conservatism. And there are, like with the other traditions and the other ideologies, there are things that are consistent that run through, and there are bits which conflict with the other bits quite strongly. Right, I'm going to go into all this in more detail in upcoming videos. I'm going to look at the key themes in more detail. I'll look at the different types of conservatives in more detail, and I'll examine the key things. So thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like, to subscribe, to comment, to take part in all the polls and everything that are on the videos. Keep watching my political ideas one. Look at my politics playlist as well, which is I'm starting to build some first-year content into that as well, to help my current cohort revise, to help my next cohort as we go through it, and hopefully to help other people out there as well. Thank you very much for watching.